it's a difference of the culture. I tell my students that whether they're from China or India, there's a story structure that they're more familiar with. Maybe it's Bollywood. In China, it's more historical narratives that they appreciate. Animation is still the Saturday morning cartoons. We're still sort of back in the 60s. Yet they have incredible talents at ICE. Some of the students just blow me away with their capabilities. But I think all students face that. How do you bring a story together? They have all the tools, but the challenge of bringing the story together is how it's going to connect. In the same way that their culture may value more of a quantitative approach than a qualitative approach. And I think that tends to get in the way all the time. They're like, well, somebody I'm going to work for is going to want me to churn this out. The same happens in games. I found out recently that in China, the games are not about how great it's going to look or how well it performs, but can I have more levels? And they really embrace that, oh, I have more levels that I can race along. And that's something you just have to recognize. They value different things because how they socially use games and how they communicate with each other. We can have first-person shooters, but sometimes that's really just sitting alone and doing it. For them, it's much more about the social interactions that take place. Another interesting difference is we may have a game that's really well developed, whether it's here in Europe or in the United States, but when you take it to Asia or China or Japan, it needs to be reskinned. You need to have a different look to the characters rather than some of the more stylized look that's here. I was surprised when I was doing a story workshop how many people had seen, say, Pixar films. They had seen only a couple of them. And I expected a much deeper, and these were people who were very familiar with animation, but they were familiar with animation more specific to their culture. And they want to compete on an international scale, but they're going to need to see more international films that tend to travel. Not that we have the lock on it, just that the story structure that comes out of Hollywood and Los Angeles just tends to travel quite well around the world. I think it's a cultural difference. I've been wondering about that, and I've been seeing a few hints about movies they're starting to organize and having directors come in, but they generally, I'm thinking the first success will be people who have come from China, come to the United States or Europe, they've really engaged in the medium over here, and then they go back to China. I think they understand the two sensibilities and how they work together. I think that's where we're going to see our first successes. In the same way we had John Woo, is it, with Mission Impossible. It would be a director like himself going back, rather than bringing people from the Western traditions and sensibilities and the genres to go over there and try to match it together. But bringing, because I thought, well, maybe it's a China, it's a real cultural problem. And then I look at the composition, some of the animation studios, and there are so many people from around the world, whether it's working at DreamWorks or Sony or Pixar, and they're from all around the world. So it's like, okay, it's not a specific race, culture, it has to do more with the marketplace that they're used to dealing with, and they're more embedded in that culture. Rather than people from China coming to the Western, learning, and going back, if you were teaching it there, I think you're going to have to take a lesson from some of the strong schools in animation. Whether you look at the CalArts or the Ringling, that when you start teaching story at Ringling, it starts in their sophomore year before they make their senior film. It's not something you start later. It's like, oh, you're about to make a film. Okay, spend 2 weeks and start, getting it together and then start production, which is pretty much sometimes how it evolves. I think they're going to have to do the same process. You're going to have to start it earlier on, and people work out some of those ideas that they've got, so they can see which ones work, which ones they discard, and then go on to the next ones. a gentleman this morning was speaking at FMX, Sergio, who did Despicable Me, and he talked about that process on how he had these ideas and he thought, oh, this was going to work, but he had to be flexible in terms of how it was going to evolve. And he thought, oh, well, I'll just do it this way. And then he began thinking, no, it's got to match the marketplace. Then it's got to match my sensibilities. Then it's got to match whoever I'm talking to, and who's ever going to back this could be someone in real estate or insurance. And I've got to help that person understand what we're trying to do rather than just think, no, listen to me. It's like, no, it's an education process. It's a much longer development process than most of us realize. It's not about the idea. And there's a certain group that say it's about the idea. Looking at successful films, it generally is about the development and the time that it takes. And telling people how long it really takes to do a good idea. If we look at people like Pixar or live action directors that take years to do it, most people don't have that time, or they just can't believe it really took that long. It's just like unimaginable that it'll take that much time. So they talk about story. They say, oh yeah, we want a story. They understand it from a conceptual standpoint, but not from a development standpoint. Ed Catmull tells a story about how they had a building that was designed on the Pixar campus, and it was this horribly designed building. And Ed talked to the architect and said, oh yeah, we designed it from the inside out so it would function well. And he went, what? This is terribly designed. Then he realized he could apply it for story. If you can say, oh, it's all about story. If you can sum it up in a simple concept, people go, oh yeah, I'm doing it for story. And then they go about their normal business of whatever they usually do. And his observation was, be careful you can sum up a concept very quickly, because it really takes digging down into it. I also ran into Ed Catmull, and he said, oh yeah, we don't do taglines anymore. You really have to have a much more complex concept to make it really work. I think where we're going to see the most impact is when their student films come out. It's like the student films we see from the best animation schools. We see them at SIGGRAPH. We see them in a variety of animation areas. And that's what I'm hoping for and look forward to is in a couple years, seeing the films that come out of it. Because it's so well organized. They've got the strength. They understand what needs to happen. And I think that's where we'll first see it. I was a judge at SIGGRAPH Asia last year, and you could see which ones were there were just technical brilliance all over the place, but there's certain ones that just spent that time developing it. And you can approach it from a variety of ways. It could be a large group that you put together like a football team, you know, oh, I've got a quarterback and I got this other guy, and it's like, oh, this is how it's going to work well this year. Or it could be individuals. It depends on how it's organized. But seeing the films that come out of it are probably the fastest way to see it. The other is going to be more long-term development down the road. And we're going to be really old men when we see that as we look back and go, I remember back then 20 years ago when we knew so-and-so, and he just really shined later. I see the best insights, and part of it is people come out of where they're usually at, their normal studios, and they come here, and especially if they come from the United States, they go, I can say stuff I would not know. It's never going to get back. And they'll reveal stuff, and they really understand that people are hungry for that information. And I am surprised how clear and insightful that information is, as well as the best people get together and they just talk and share. But as I said, it's those insights, because we're not there in the United States in Los Angeles where everybody has to watch what they say. But they're here with their peers, and they know their peers are listening, so they want to give them the best possible information, and everybody who attends just gets that benefit.